Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Career Chat. I'm Krista Harmon. I am one of the Career Readiness Consultants at the Kent Intermediate School District. And today we welcome Deb Waters. She is from the Emergency Department at the Helen DeVos Children's Hospital, and she's a nurse and also a nurse educator. So I'm looking forward to hearing some of her story today. So welcome, Deb. Thanks for making time to be with us.
Thank you for having me, Krista.
So Deb, a lot of these young people are high school age, and so, 15 or 16. So they would love to hear what you were thinking back in high school. Is this something you knew all the time? Give us that general career path and what you were thinking back then.
Well, I wasn't probably at age 15, 16. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I had some ideas. I knew that I liked human body and the physical science part of learning. And so the human body had always intrigued me. But I really didn't know what a nurse did. I didn't have any nurses in my family. I never had been to a hospital except for an x-ray. So I didn't really even have a clue what a nurse did. I thought all they did was like wipe people's butts and, change bedding. And so I wasn't really all that excited about it. And so I think I did some career exploration when I was a senior, and I thought, oh, maybe physical therapy. Oh man, I was so bored. I could not, I just knew right away just by visiting it wasn't for me. And so my dad probably knew me a little bit better than I knew myself at the time. He said, well, why don't you think about nursing? And I'm like, I don't even know what it's about. And he said, well, I have a handicapped brother who was a near drowning at age 2. He goes, I think you would really like it. It's about taking care of people. It's about, coordinating their care, giving them medicines, starting IVs, and he just named a few things. And I thought, well, okay, because, what I wanted was to go through 4 years of college and be able to do something. That was my main focus. I looked at doing a general bachelor of science. And when you do that, that's fine, but you always have to do something else to go beyond that. So I decided to actually just between after I graduated and before I actually started college, I switched my major from general science to nursing. And to be honest, I was probably halfway through my nursing school and I wasn't even sure, I hadn't gotten to the clinical part yet. And I wasn't really sure 100% that was for me, but I just kept moving forward in the right direction. And I got to the clinical part and I felt like, oh, I'm not sure I want to do that kind of nursing. I'm not sure I want to do that kind of nursing. And sort of, I was in between my junior and senior year and I got an externship in Chicago working at an infant special care unit. And, halfway through the summer, I realized that I actually loved my job. I loved what I was doing and I loved going to work and I just couldn't think of anything else I would rather do. And so that sort of started me on the path taking care of pediatric patients. Fresh out of school, graduating from nursing school, I got a job at Spectrum Health in their neonatal intensive care unit. And I spent off and on 12 years there. I spent some time working overseas in Africa. And when I came back, I started working in the pediatric emergency department. So I sort of transitioned. I didn't even know I wanted to work in the pediatric emergency department, actually, because I was just going to do what was easy and come back and work as a NICU nurse again. But it was a time when there wasn't any nursing jobs available in NICU. So my husband happened to have been an ER nurse, and he goes, well, that new children's hospital is opening. Why don't you apply for the peds emergency department? I said, why don't you apply for it? And he goes, Deb, I do not do peds. No pediatrics for me. And I'm like, I don't like adults. So, maybe I'll try that. And I just loved it and wouldn't go back to any other kind of nursing at this point. So
That's so great.
I've been an educator for about 18 months now. And that was sort of a interesting transition. I was really happy in my job. I wasn't really looking to transition, but this has been a good transition for me as well.
We'll definitely dig into what that role is all about too. Thank you for sharing that early career path. I want to take you back just a little bit. So you had done a job shadow. So that was a key piece for you to decide that physical therapy was not for you. But it doesn't sound like you had done a job shadow for nursing, yet you proceeded forward. That's funny to me.
I know. I think it just was, I liked the idea that there was so many different opportunities in nursing. If you don't like one, you can move on to another. And, if you're bored after 5 years, you can go to do something else, or, you don't even have to wait that long, but just the variety of things that you could do in nursing really had an appeal to me.
Yeah.
So I didn't know any nurses. So I didn't really, I kind of went on what my dad saw as my strengths. And his encouragement to me. And I had been caring for my brother. So as he was, after his near drowning, he was not a normal kid anymore. He had a significant brain injury due to lack of oxygen to his brain during that time. And so in some ways I was already doing an externship, or I took care of my brother, and my parents trusted me. Even as when I was 15, they went out of the country for 10 days and left me and my older brother in charge, and including my handicapped brother. So I had a pretty good idea, even though I didn't know I had a good idea of what a nurse did, so it
Well,
was.
obviously your dad, like you said, your dad was observing you and had saw those traits. And so I do want to just give a plug for parents. I've worked with many students who kind of disregard what their parents say sometimes, but not all parents are going to, they might put their own agenda on you, but sometimes it's really good to listen to people around you and ask what they see as your strength. So I just want to encourage young people. So think about that externship, that original one, the infant special care. How did you get your externship? Did the school help you get that? How did that even come about that you landed in that spot?
That's a good question. I actually there was like a career fair at college. And at the time they were transitioning here in Grand Rapids to being just looking to, they weren't doing any externships anymore. They had transitioned out of that, and everyone had to have like their certified nursing assistant, their CNA, to be able to get a job. And I wasn't, between my junior and senior year, I wasn't willing to spend money to get a career that in a year would, I didn't want to spend money on the certification for a nursing assistant in a year would be obsolete anyway, because I'd be an RN. So I just broadened my search, and Evanston Hospital was one of the hospitals that I had been at that career fair, and I just literally called them up and said, do you still have any extern positions available? And it was probably God's timing, but they said, actually, we just had one open up this week. Are you interested? And it wasn't exactly what I was looking for. I was hoping for ED at the time because I thought maybe I would like the excitement of ED. And they said, well, no, we have an opening in the infant special care unit. And I'm like, okay, that's higher acuity. I could go for that. And I was like thinking, man, babies, like all they do is cry all the time. Like, and then I told myself, you can do anything for 3 months. This is a summer job. You can do anything for 3 months. And so,
Great attitude.
I just thought, I moved to Chicago, had a blast in Chicago on my days off. And, like I said, halfway through the summer, I just realized that I loved my job, and those babies didn't cry all that much because they were too sick to cry. So, it was really a fantastic learning experience for me.
Well, I think that's some takeaways in that too for young people, is that you pursued it. You didn't give up. You're the one that made it happen by calling that hospital. So I just want the young people to know that this stuff doesn't come to you always. You have to be pursuing what you want. So I thank you for sharing that so much. How did you end up in Africa? What's that about?
Well, I did some mission work in Africa. It was something, I'd been a nurse for about 5 years, and then I had met a missionary and got to talking. And so I just decided I was going to take a break, and I was going to work in Africa for 2 years. I only worked there for a little over a year initially because I met my husband there, and we came back and got married, but we ended up back there 6 months later. But I did do nursing in Africa, and probably that was the hardest nursing I ever did, emotionally, mentally, just how sick and very ill the people were at baseline, and then they really needed ICU care, and we didn't have ICU care, and that was probably really tough because I probably lost 3 or 4 patients a shift sometimes, and that's not a day, that's per shift. So that was just in the 8 hours that I was working. So that was really challenging.
But what you're pointing out too is that you, because of this 4-year degree, you had a skill that you could offer people who were in poverty, who didn't have, and so you had the skill to take with you to another part of the world. And I know for some young people, they're commenting in the chat how that's just so amazing, very cool. So that's resonating with maybe a value of theirs, that they have something to offer, people.
Yeah, and having a degree from the US, I was in the least developed poorest country, one of the bottom 3 poorest countries in the world. And I didn't have to do any extra training for that country, and need was so great. And, just, even being able to mentor the other nurses, in how to keep things clean. Their nursing care was stuck back in the 50s, and this was in the late 90s that I did this. So it really was a challenge to try and slowly implement some newer practices with the staff there.
Yeah, that's a really neat opportunity, though. Like I said, it was the hardest nursing you've ever done. I know for some young people, they want to hear what your life is like in the pediatric department with babies at NICU. But you started in the emergency department. Is that where you started then, your first job? Tell us what a day-to-day was like.
I started
your first job.
My first job was in the NICU. Yeah,
Okay.
first job was in the NICU, and yeah, I took care of, at the time, it was still a fairly large department for the country, but now I think the Helen DeVos Children's Hospital NICU is the largest in the country. They have over 100 beds. It wasn't quite that big when I was there. We had more about 35 to 40 beds. And between when I did my externship in Chicago, they had developed something new to try and help very premature babies with their lungs. They developed a surfactant that helped them to their lungs not to stick together, and there was less trauma to their lungs with this new surfactant. And that was another thing that I really loved. We were always doing research as well to have better and better outcomes for these little infants. When I started, 23-week babies almost never lived. 12 years later, when I left, 23-week babies often lived, and sometimes they did so very well that they just had asthma left. So the things that I did during the course of a shift would be somewhat variable. Usually was assigned to a few babies, and it was my job to make sure that their vital signs were kept up to date. If they, we had to turn them a special way. And when they're on a ventilator and hooked up to all kinds of things, turning is a big deal. And it's hard. We learned all about the best kind of positioning for infants, because they're used to being all scrunched up in a mom's tummy, even at 23 weeks. And so we sort of like almost gave them like a little cocoon, and we did lots of developmental care for the babies. And we learned, even while I was in the department, within the first couple of years, how oxygen, though a good thing, can also at too high of concentrations be a bad thing for their eyes. And so I was involved in a study about how to keep your eyes from being damaged by excess oxygen. So there was a lot of different, again, like you're always learning something new. And I think that's one of the things that I found so fascinating, or find so fascinating about nursing in general and being in a medical profession, is that there's always new things that we're learning. There's always something new that comes up, like the coronavirus, that you have to try and sort out, how are we going to deal with this? And what do we know? And what more do we need to know? And so I think there's just so much that we learn. If we keep our eyes and ears open, there's so much that we learn every day. So
yeah, and
yeah.
I would hope that some of these young people on the call are, lifelong learners is what we call it, where you just always love to keep learning. So that's a beautiful thing about nursing for sure. So Diana wants to know, what's the most exciting part of your job? And if you can think both as a nurse and then as an educator, give students a little more information what the educator's about, but give us some exciting things about your work.
Well, I love taking care of kids. I think they're so fun. Like even when they're little, like if they don't want you to do something, they'll tell you, and they'll just, and sometimes they'll say it so politely that it's really hard not to laugh, because they're being so polite. Can you please not do that to me anymore? Or, they're just, they respond to jokes, and they, you know, they make their own jokes, and they can be funny. So I love just interacting with children. I think the fact that they always made me laugh or smile every day at work was, you know, so fun, right? You know, I love being in a profession where you're laughing and smiling every day. Some of the things that I really enjoyed about working in the pediatric emergency department, it may sound wrong to you guys, but I love pediatric trauma, being able to care for kids like in a very difficult, when they're in a very difficult situation. Sometimes they come in by ambulance and their parents aren't with them because they're still working on getting their parents out of the out of the car crash or whatever, or their parents are following behind the ambulance. You know, there's all kinds of reasons why kids aren't always with their parents at times. And I just really, it's so helpful and so necessary to be there, be able to say your mom's on their way, you know, your dad's on their way. We're here to help you when they're not here. And so I just love, you know, even the technical skills of starting those IVs, of, you know, evaluating, are they doing better with what I've done? Do they need something different? Do I need to call the doctor's attention to something else that's going wrong with my patient? You know, being their eyes and ears. You know, the doctors tend to get a lot of credit for doing stuff. And it's not that they're not smart, but they rely heavily upon the nurses to be their eyes and ears and to let them know when something's not quite right. So I just enjoy that interprofessional dynamic, working with physicians, working with respiratory therapists. In the children's hospital, we have child life. So there's lots of different people and that you interact with on a daily basis.
So that sounds definitely some enjoyable things.
So I was probably.
Yeah, I was gonna say that sounds very enjoyable. So you made that transition to educator. Do you miss kids working with them daily as an educator, or do you still get to do that?
I do, yeah. I don't really get to do that, but I get to teach nurses about how to take care of kids and how to miss subtle signs that they might miss because they're different. Kids are different from adults. And so I get to teach other people not to be scared of kids. There's a lot of emergency departments who are not pediatric specialists like Helen DeVos Children's Hospital is. And I'm responsible for helping to teach all of the Spectrum Health emergency departments about pediatrics. So, you know, so that when they come in, you know, a sick child comes in, they're not like deer in the headlights, I don't know what to do. They've heard from me, you know, the steps to take and how to evaluate. And we do a lot of training with them to, you know, with everyone in the emergency department and how to take care of different types of chief complaints, what people come in, why they come in. We call them a chief complaint. So someone might have abdominal pain, that's a chief complaint, or a headache, that's a chief complaint. So we teach them how to take care of all those different things. And so I like to think that I'm making a difference for any child who comes into the emergency department, that their nurses aren't like freaked out about taking care of a kid, and that they just talk to them and enjoy them a little bit more.
So like you said, you're making even a bigger reach now in this role of helping kids. I know some of the students have asked in the past, like,
yeah, I still miss the interaction. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, there's a delay on our mics, unfortunately.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead and share. I know one of the students in the past, when you deal with little TD babies, what are some of the myths that there might be out there about dealing with in neonatal or kids in general? What are some of the things you'd like the kids to know that's maybe not what's like on TV or what they think it might be like?
I don't know. There's a lot of things that people, you know, great grandma passed this down to grandma, who passed it down to your mom, who maybe has passed it down to you. Sometimes those things are not necessarily helpful. You know, so I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to answer. I don't know if I'm answering the question correctly, but you know, there's lots of things that people think that kids are really hard to take care of, and you know, I think you just have to have the right mindset when you're caring for kids. You know, kids crying is normal. It's normal for a child to cry on a daily basis, and they cry every day for a really long time, and may not be because they're in pain. It may be because they're angry or they're frustrated or they're hungry or their diaper's wet. There's all kinds of different things why kids cry. And you can, as a parent, you learn to figure that out. But even as a medical professional, you learn to figure out, I don't like that cry. That cry sounds not good. It's not a strong cry. It's a very weak cry. And so you get worried about different cries, and you tune your ear into to figure those things out. So there's a lot of, fear about, well, kids cry all the time. Well, that's normal. If they don't cry, we're more worried when we expect them to. So I think maybe that's a myth. It's just that they cry all the time. Some people think it's harder to deal with their parents than it is to deal with the actual child. And, I think dealing with parents isn't that difficult, because the bottom line is they're concerned about their child and they feel out of control. And so it's our job to help them, to give them the information they need to know that their child is being well taken care of, and to answer their questions, and to maybe try and educate them on what they can do in the future, to either help prevent an accident or, so that maybe they can handle something at home, instead of having to come in. But the bottom line with caring for parents is addressing their concerns and addressing their fears. And it goes a huge long ways, and reassuring them. Most of the time they're just worried, so they need that reassurance to know what the right things to do is, and that actually they were doing a really good job at home. A lot of them do a fantastic job at home, and they need to hear that. So it's caring for a whole family when you're caring for a pediatric patient. You're not just caring for a child, you're caring for a family. So
How do you deal with when your young patients pass away? How have you coped with that? Young people have some maybe anxiety of, maybe that's why they don't want to go into it.
Well, I mean, that's a really good question. It is very sad, right? When I worked in the NICU particularly, it was sad because, everyone, when you're younger, you think, well, a baby's just cooked for 9 months and then they are born and then they're perfect, right? But that doesn't always happen, and sometimes difficult things happen and babies do pass away. Now, working in the Helen DeVos Children's Hospital in their NICU, I knew that we had done everything that we could possibly do to save that child. I never felt like, oh, well, if we would have done X, or if we would have done Y, or if we would have done Z, maybe they would have survived. I always felt very confident that, given the resources that we have, and they were extensive, that, the child was just not able to have a better outcome. So in some ways, for me, though it was sad, I felt like it wasn't as, I knew we had done everything that we could possibly have done for the child. Some things that I find that are harder to deal with are abuse cases. When children are abused by their parents, I think those are very, very challenging. And I've dealt with a number of those. And, it's really hard because you don't always know the whole situation, and it's not your job to know the whole situation. It's your job to take care of the patient and make them as comfortable as possible. And, when they die, it is very sad. And it's okay for it to be sad and for it not to be a good thing. And I will tell you that I have shed tears over losing a patient, especially when it's been a really tragic circumstance, and it's just really hard. But, I also know that we did everything that we could have to try and save that child's life as well. So I think when you work in a center of excellence, I think for me, it always gives me more peace knowing that I have done what I've, one, been trained to do, and two, we're as up to date medically as we can be to know the best, to try to accomplish the best outcome for the child. And in the end, we may have done every single thing right, but the outcome is still a death. And that's not our decision in the long run. That's, that's God's decision. And, we can do everything right, but it doesn't mean we own the outcome. So if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think I would think that just your team offer each other support, that's a big part of your job with your colleagues. Is that true?
Absolutely. Absolutely. At Spectrum, we have something called CISM, which is critical incident stress management. And when we have, especially when we have a pediatric death that is usually offered to us, and the people who were involved in that infant's or child's death are invited to come and start to emotionally process what we see, what we've heard, how we're feeling about it. And it's not really a touchy-feely thing. It's just a way for us to emotionally process things, because it is challenging. A lot of people don't have another medical professional to go home to at night. And, maybe the person that's home with them sits at a desk all day and pushes papers around or is on the computer. They don't deal with a lot of the things that we deal with. And it can be really challenging. So we really heavily rely upon our work family to help us process those things. And it's, so very important. I think that's what makes or breaks a team. And it's if you feel connected there and if you can really help each other out in those difficult circumstances.
So with our we only have about 3 minutes left, Deb. Help students understand how Spectrum works as far as after this COVID thing, we kind of move through. Do they allow job shadows? How might a student go about that if they wanted to job shadow, see if this was the right thing for them?
A lot of times they have to know someone who works at Spectrum Health. I've done a job shadow for my niece or one of my nephews, and a friend from church asked me to have her daughter shadow me. So, I've done that. It helps to know someone. You can go right to Spectrum Health's website but you have to be connected with someone in Spectrum Health to have set up that job shadow. And then they help you, they send you a link to be able to, you have to fill out a pre-work form, and then I think there's some background information that they have to get for you. But once you're connected, then it's pretty easy. It's just you arrange a time with, with the person to shadow them at work for 4 to 6 hours, which could be, really good. I do not know, honestly, if that has changed with COVID or not. I'm not 100% sure. You'd have to probably look on the website to know for sure, because I haven't had anyone recently reach out to me. So.
Yeah, it is closed right now. There is no job shadowing. Is my understanding that they're really making a priority to get the college level students in. We do have our immersion program. We are doing a virtual right now, but just, students, that is something that we have to get students in for job shadows. And Deb's one of our hosts, actually, on the Spectrum side of the actual immersion program. So if you are not a senior, keep an eye out for that for next year. But these guests that you guys are meeting are part of your network. And so now you have names to call, or you can cold call a department and tell them with a very professional introduction, what your name is, what school you go to, what you're interested in researching or exploring through job shadow. And the staff at Spectrum Health have been very, very supportive of that. So I just want to let you know that this is one of the hospitals that does allow job shadowing. Mercy Health does not, but Metro Health does. And so if you go to Metro Health here in Grand Rapids and look up job shadow on Google, you'll come across their process as well. So Deb, I'm going to let you think for a minute, but what your final word of wisdom will be for these young people. I'm going to give them a few resources as we finish up, and then we'll stop our recording here in just a minute. So if you're new to Career Chats, I do offer this research site. This is where you can get some more nuts and bolts about these careers, how much money they make, if this is a growing field, what type of skill sets are needed. So I love onetonline.org. So check that out. Again, this is just a snapshot for registered nurses. It gives you other titles. So again, you don't know what you don't know. So this kind of site starts to educate you about the different lingo. And then there's all these different categories that you can research about all sorts of careers. I mean, just thousands of careers. And this little search bar up at the top is where you can plug in a title. But there's also a way on this website to do some more interest inventories to figure out what it might be. And again, for nurses, it talks about the kind of knowledge you might need, the kind of natural skills that you will have to have. And so I highly recommend that site. Deb, this is her email. I should confirm that's okay to give this out if anyone has any follow-up questions. I think I asked it in the initial sign-up sheet, but I should have asked you ahead of time.
Sure. Yeah, that's fine. Mhm.
So Deborah Waters at Helen DeVos Children's. And then my name, again, is Krista Harmon at kentisd.org. So I'll go back just for 1 second. So it's Deborah Waters. So Deb, what do you think about word of wisdom as these young people are exploring what they might want to do when they grow up? And thank you so much for sharing your time, but this is your chance to be the final role model gold.
I would say don't be super stressed if you don't know exactly what you want to do right now. I know that, you know, I only sort of at crunch time, sort of when I was deciding after I graduated, I even decided differently after I graduated to when I started college that, you know, I knew sort of what I liked, but I still had to figure it out and do those final little wiggles to get to the right spot. And, you know, I think you have to listen to those around you who see what you are good at. It doesn't have, you know, it can be parents. It could just be a friend like, hey, you are super good at that. You should really consider doing that. Or have you ever thought about this? Sometimes those around us know what's best. Certainly that was the case with me and how I ended up probably in both of my jobs. And, you know, talk to people in the profession if you're at all interested in it, because I think it does help to hear on a personal basis what they went through and what their suggestions are.
Yes, and that's why we thank you so much for, yeah, don't stress. That's why I thank you so much for making time, because they're like getting this virtual job shadow, right? Hearing your story, hearing what it's like. This is so helpful to these young people as they're exploring health careers. They're going to be listening to a total of 14 of them. So they've learned about all sorts of careers. So thank you so much for making time to be with us today, Deb. We thank you for all your support with our programming.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me, Krista.